Cool. Well, welcome everyone. And this Mindfulness Monday with Mindfulness UK, we thought we would do a short landing practice in the normal way, and then go on to have a look at mindfulness of breath and maybe compare it to the ever-changing nature of the weather. I'm conscious that we in the UK love talking about the weather because it's always changing. And in fact, today I've actually got blue sky and sunshine after a lot of rain and grey for the last week. But actually, sometimes these kind of what's passing all around us day to day can serve as a really useful reminder and actually teacher of what's going on inside as well. So we thought we'd have maybe a little bit of a look at that. So just before we do that, though, let's just start by just kind of arriving in the moment. And what we're looking to do is just to kind of settle a bit. We've probably all had a busy Monday morning, and really then we can participate in a way that's kind of present and relaxed. So I'm going to invite you just to settle into a comfortable position. You can either close your eyes or just lower your gaze, whatever you find comfortable. And you're looking to kind of sit or stand or lie just in a way that has your back reasonably straight. So it wants to be comfortable, doesn't want to be kind of stiff like some sort of military pose, but just, if it's reasonably straight, that will help you stay alert. If it's too kind of slouched, often you can get quite tired and sometimes drift off, which can be nice too sometimes, but maybe not today. And I'm going to ask you just to take 3 long, deep, slow breaths. And kind of as you breathe out slowly, just imagine that any tension in your body or in your mind is just kind of blowing out. You're just going to soften into the present moment. And then when you've taken those 3 deep breaths, now just an invitation to allow the breath to return to its completely natural rhythm. So we're not trying to control it at all. And then what we're going to look to do is just to place our attention on that breath as it arises and passes. So maybe following the breath as it comes into the tip of our nose and goes down our throat and fills our lungs and our chest. And then watching it as the same breath flows out. And then there's often a sort of little pause, a little bit of stillness, and then the next breath arises. What we're going to look to do is just to follow that cycle a bit with our mind, with our attention. And if it helps, you can always put one hand on your tummy or your chest, just so that as well as being aware of the breath flowing in and out of your body, you can actually get that slight feeling of movement as your chest rises and falls with each breath. That can sometimes be really helpful to stabilize and just to feel the breath as well as noticing it. And if for any reason you don't feel comfortable with your attention on the breath, that's absolutely fine. That's quite normal for some people. And maybe in that case, just focus a little bit on the body. So maybe the feeling of whichever parts of the body are in contact with the floor or the seat beneath you. Just feeling that stability, that support that you're being given. But equally, if you're comfortable with the breath, then just using that as your anchor and just following that. And we use these practices, this focus on the breath or the body, as a way of anchoring into the here and now, the present moment. So we're not looking to be thinking about the future. We're not reliving or reminiscing about the past. And we're not wishing the present was any different. We're just consciously being present and allowing it to be exactly as it is. Whether that's today might be busy or calm, might be stressed or peaceful, might be hot or cold. Just seeing if we can soften and just allow it to be, and just to be with it without any kind of judgment, just noticing what's actually just happening right now, moment to moment, as life unfolds. Just being with it, breath by breath. And if at any point you notice that you've moved off into thoughts or emotions or feelings, an invitation to give a little inner smile and just to gently bring your attention back to the anchor of the breath or the body with a kind and non-judgmental attitude. This moment of realizing and of returning to the here and now, this waking up out of thoughts or emotions, this is the practice. To just keep coming back to the present and allowing it to be, breath by breath. Noticing the breath arising and noticing it passing. And arising and passing. And as we move to wrap up this landing practice, just noticing if those words noticing if those words cause thoughts to arise. So that's the natural function of the mind. It has a stimulus and it produces thoughts. So just noticing whether thoughts like, what's next? What's going to happen in a moment? Start to arise. And if they do, just taking that as an opportunity to notice that. But for 3 more breaths, just to keep the awareness on the breath rather than going off into thoughts. And then in your own time, feel free to gently open your eyes, maybe have a stretch or a drink, and we'll just come back together briefly. And just while you do, just like to read this poem by Wu Men. In 1,000 flowers in spring, a full moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind is not clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. Okay, so now we've done a landing practice. Maybe just settle back into that relaxed position. Again, just gently closing your eyes or lowering your gaze. And we'll just explore mindfulness of breath and how we can use the weather as a symptom and example of maybe what's going on inside a lot of the time. So we'll start just by dropping back onto the breath, this anchor, as it arises and passes out of the body in its natural rhythm. Just following that rhythm, the arising of the breath in through the nose, down the throat and filling the lungs and chest, and then passing back out of the throat and nose. And that beautiful little stillness, that moment of pause before the body naturally breathes again and the next breath arises. And if it helps, you can follow the whole cycle from tip of your nose to your lungs and back out. Or if you prefer, you can just focus on one particular place. So maybe just the tip of the nose, or maybe the movement as your chest and belly just rise gently and fall gently. Whichever one is most comfortable to you. And there are many reasons why this breath practice is so helpful. Firstly, the breath is always there for as long as you're alive, so it's always accessible, whatever's going on, moment to moment, day to day. There's no excuse that you can't do it because it's on a device that you left back at home on the kitchen table. The breath is always just there, arising and passing. The next reason is because the breath is always moving and always changing. Can't hold on to it. It's not the same. And this perfectly illustrates life and the way that all things are also always in movement. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes in major ways. Sometimes the breath is very subtle as we sit still, quiet. Other times, maybe when we're running for a bus, our chest is bursting. And the breath reminds us of the fact that life is always changing, much like the weather. Sometimes sunny, sometimes rainy, sometimes warm, sometimes cold. So when we follow the breath, we see if we can just notice the unique qualities of each individual breath. What's this one like? And what's this one like? Another reason why the breath can be so helpful is because the arising and passing of each breath is actually very similar to the way that thoughts and feelings occur. There's a stimulus, something happens, and thoughts and feelings arise. But if we can observe them as opposed to getting lost in them, much like each breath, notice it arising, it fills us, and then it passes and is replaced by another breath. And as you start to practice, you'll see that it's very similar with thoughts and feelings. We're not pushing away the thought or the feeling, just like you wouldn't try to stop breathing. But we're just noticing how, left to its own devices, body naturally breathes each in-breath and each out-breath, and the mind naturally produces each thought, each feeling. If we allow them to be, they arise and they pass to be replaced by something else. We don't need to be entangled in them. We can just notice them, maybe even name them, but allow them to be and to do their thing. And a further reason why we focus on the breath is because scientific studies have shown that as we bring our awareness to our breath, out of our busy minds, we just naturally settle. Our bodies appreciate the chance just to breathe and to settle. And our bodies start producing all the endorphins and serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, happy chemicals, which can rebalance us, revitalize us, and make us feel relaxed and more positive. And so we use this anchor of the breath, which is always there with us, always available to us, just to anchor ourselves and steady our minds and become aware of what's happening right now, breath by breath. And this is mindfulness. And if we notice that our attention has moved off to something else, in that realization, we can bring our attention back to the anchor of the breath of the body. And this is mindfulness practice. Sometimes it's easy, like the breath. Sometimes it's really hard, like the breath when we're running. And either way is absolutely fine. So just looking to be with it, however it is today. Is each breath gentle or labored? Are these breaths short or long, or are they changing? And without changing anything, we notice if our breath is deep or is shallow. There's no right or wrong. Can we just notice what they are today? And can we notice if there's any change in the breath as we settle and spend a bit longer on it? Is there a change from the start of the practice to what's happening now? And whilst we have our attention on the breath, can we see if we can notice any thoughts arising? And if we notice them, can we just name them? Say, oh, there's a thought. I'm choosing on this occasion just to keep my attention and my focus on the breath. A little bit like if we hear a sound, we might think, oh, there's a sound. But we can choose to just keep the attention on the breath and allow the sound to arise and to pass. Another way of imagining it is to see thoughts or feelings a little bit like clouds in the sky. If you imagine that standing in a field looking up at the big blue sky is like just following your breath, seeing what's happening moment to moment. And then a cloud appears and moves across the sky from one side to the other. Thoughts can be very much like this. They arise, and you might see them, but if you don't engage and follow them, but keep your awareness on the deep blue sky, and actually you notice that the thought just arises like a cloud and passes across and then disappears. And the sky, or the cycle of the breaths, is always there. And that's the focus of attention when we're doing a practice. And it's important to recognize that there's nothing wrong with these clouds. The nature of the environment is that weather fronts bring clouds and clouds arise and pass. We wouldn't say it's wrong that these things happen. And it's the same with thoughts and feelings. The nature of the mind is to produce them. And here the invitation is just to see that happening, see that playing out, to witness and maybe even name it, but not to get engaged in it, instead just to keep the focus on behind whatever this thought is, behind whatever that cloud is. There is this sky, there is this cycle of the breaths. And actually I've set aside some time, so that's going to be my focus of attention now. Just each breath arising and passing, and then the next breath arising, and in its turn passing. And there's no right or wrong. Sometimes there may be lots of thoughts in our mind, often because something will have happened that's triggering them. And sometimes there'll be lots of clouds in the sky. But we don't get frustrated when there are clouds in the sky. We don't tell the sky off. It's just the nature of what's happening today, the weather today. But instead, we can see the clouds and name them, but also widen our awareness to be aware that behind the clouds, there is still that deep blue sky. And as soon as we do that, maybe the power of the thought starts to weaken, because it's something that's just one of a number of things happening, and actually we can widen our awareness back to the breath and just focus on that. And sometimes the clouds are white and fluffy and lovely, just like some thoughts. And sometimes they're dark and menacing and dropping loads of rain on us, like other thoughts. But they're still just clouds. And they won't be there forever. They arise, and in their own time they pass. And the invitation is to see that what's happening in our mind is very similar. And we see this through this practice of just being with our attention on an anchor, whether it's the breath or the body, and just witnessing actual reality as it arises in the here and now, moment to moment, breath by breath. Noticing any clouds that arise, and maybe naming them, and bringing the attention back to the breath and allowing the clouds to pass. And sometimes there'll be periods where there's no clouds at all, and there's just a deep blue sky day after day. And at other times, maybe in the winter time, there'll be times when there's clouds day after day, maybe rain day after day. But we know inside us, we know that it's not always going to be this way. It's a passing phase, and as we allow it to be and to pass in its own time, that brings with it a strong sense of groundedness, of perspective, and of calm. We don't need to run around getting agitated that there are clouds in the sky, or hoping that it's always cloudless, that it's always blue skies. We notice that the nature of reality is that things are always changing. Sometimes sunny, sometimes cloudy. Sometimes our lives are peaceful and settled, and sometimes they're really busy and stressed. But that's the flow of life, and it's always changing. So there's no need to think it'll get locked into any particular condition forever. And indeed, by being able to see the true nature of this ever-changing reality, it loosens the effect that thoughts or feelings, however painful or difficult, can have over us, because we see they're just ephemeral, they're just transitory. And that's why we do this mindfulness practice of just being in the here and now, following each breath. And we can listen to and trust our innate inner sense of wisdom as to what's an appropriate way for us to do this practice. For some people, it might be sitting for 15 or 30 minutes in the morning. For others, it may be just taking 5 minutes out 3 times a day, just to drop back into the breath. Whatever's appropriate for us, whatever we find most helpful, is often the best way forward. And so as we come to the end of the practice, just seeing if we can follow the last 3 breaths with our awareness. And then in your own time, maybe having a stretch, a bit of movement, and then gently opening your eyes and having a drink, and we'll come back together. And I'll just stop the recording.